Thank you all for coming back. I really do appreciate you as always. I cannot say it enough. And again, you know, I always say I'm not going to go through the intro stuff, and I won't go through the intro stuff. So I just get right to it. You know, since me and Reggie started this podcast, I've like noticed a disturbing trend. And it seems like the trend is that it seems like couples have been married for decades are now getting divorced. It's like a regular thing now. And when I say decades, I literally mean decades, like 20 years or more. Not when I over exaggerate time like I often do and be like, it was 100 years and it was only like five. Like people are crossing the 20-year threshold when you would think that things are just like smooth and safe. They're crossing that threshold and then deciding that they don't want to be together anymore. And me and Reggie, we talked about a few of these, like Dr. Dre, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, and there are more that I can't even think of. It's like almost to the point where we should start like a new segment on the show just talking about who got divorced this week. And when I say regularly, I used to see this all the time. Like since we started this podcast, I would see like at least once a month somebody who's been married for 20 years or more, they're getting divorced, and I'm talking about famous people and stuff like that. And like, and the reason I bring this up now and the reason I'm going to talk about it now is because the most recent person that I saw who was getting divorced is Blair Underwood. Now, for people that don't know, Blair Underwood, he was on a TV show called New York Undercover. If you're black, I'm sure you know him, but if you're white, you might be struggling to like figure out now who is this dude again. And for you people that don't really know who he is, I don't really know what to tell you. He he he's kind of like the Luther Vandross of acting, and that's not to say that he was a good an actor as Luther Vandross was a singer. Matter of fact, not even close. But I mean that in the sense that he is way more popular amongst black people, but never really crossed over into like white land or into the mainstream, much like Luther did. Because like as popular as Luther Vandross got, and I know he had, what was the joint, the wedding joint, Here and Now, which strangely is one of my favorite Luther Vandross songs with all of his catalog. But anyway, I like the song. Anyway, it crossed over and it was popular as a wedding song, but people like him and like Anita Baker, they were always like known as like ours. And with all of that said, the more that I'm thinking about it, the more I'm starting to think that this is a unfair comparison because Blair, even amongst black people, he's known. But I think Blair Underwood is known more because he was on an iconic show in the 90s in New York Undercover. And he just kind of rode that wave ever since. And that's how people know him. They remember him from an iconic show. Even though, to be honest, the show was it wasn't great. I think it came on like after like Living Single and In Living Color. I think it was like in that blocks when Fox was like showing all the cutting edge black shows and stuff like that, and it was like appointment television that just kind of fit into that. So he was on an iconic show, whereas Luther is an icon. Like Luther isn't just known for one thing, and while Blair does have a resume at work, it still doesn't compare to Luther's body of work. So I don't really think that's a fair comparison. And kind of getting off the rails totally, a fair comparison to Luther would be, I mentioned Anita Baker, but like Mary J. Blige would probably be a better comparison to Luther because Mary J. Blige is ours, despite having some crossover success. Like Luther had some crossover success with white people, it's still, you still don't think of like Mary J. Blige as like a mainstream artist, like somebody that we have to share like Whitney Houston or something like that. Whereas in Luther was that same way. It's like he never really crossed over. He was always ours, as opposed to like a Whitney Houston, who we kind of had to share and stuff like that. She wasn't like completely ours, and that's nothing against Whitney. And Yeah, and even in death, people love Whitney, so it's not like I'm saying anything's wrong with crossing over or anything like that. I, all of this was a long way of just trying to like explain who Blair Underwood is. For people that don't know him, yeah, I kind of went the long way in trying to explain it. But yeah, if you don't know him, you don't know him. I don't know if you can find old episodes of New York Undercover, or if you even want to find old episodes of New York Cover Undercover. And I know he's been in other things since. But you ask most people what Blair Underwood is known for, especially Black people, they'll say New York Undercover. So hey, his mama named him Clay. I'm gonna call him Clay. We're just gonna keep it like that. And I definitely don't want that to be like me taking a shot at Blair Underwood's acting career. I, hey, he's done fine. He's done fine. But what this is not about Blair Underwood in particular, but it's about these divorces that have been going on for like decades. And then all of a sudden, the marriages that have been going on for decades. And then all of a sudden, they end in divorce, which is strange to me, obviously. That's the reason I'm talking about it. But and it speaks to why, well, what am I trying to say? I just don't understand why these things are happening after 20 or more years of marriage. And I don't understand why there's a rash of them happening now. Like I said, it seems like I see at least one once a month. Like even with Blair Underwood, that comes after 27 years. He was married for 27 years. That dude is 56 years old now. So doing the math, that means he got married when he was 29 years old. I- So basically, he just missed like all of his 30s, all of his 40s, and now half of his 50s. So, assuming that he didn't cheat, which I'm sure that there is a large contingent of women that would consider that to be impossible, that he had to cheat, that dude missed 2.5 decades of dating. And even if he was cheating during that time, seeing somebody on the side, that's like completely different from being in a relationship with them and claiming them as your primary. You don't get the vibe of what's going on here in a single life by having a side piece. So even if he was cheating, doesn't really have anything to do with what I'm talking about here in terms of missing out on what dating is like and how things have evolved and all of that. Like like it even thinking about side relationships now that I'm talking about it, it's just like shoot, you know, like it or not, shoot, side relationships have a lot of benefits. They have a, they have a lot of benefits that committed relationships don't. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that side relationships are better. I'm definitely not saying that. But with that said, you can't deny that it's nice to have a relationship that includes a lot of positives without the obligations that weigh on a lot of committed relationships and weighs them down. It's just like you can only spend time doing the positive things that you both enjoy when you're with that side person. And for people that crap on side relationships, and understandably so, because again, I'm not condoning those. You know that there's something about the person that you're currently with that you wish you didn't have to deal with. You can love them. I'm not saying that you don't love them, you don't care about them, you wouldn't ride with them if it came down to it. But there is something about that man, there is something about that woman that if you could do away with, you would. And that's something inside relationships that you don't have to. That thing that annoys you about a person, the side person usually doesn't do that, doesn't see that, or they're not bothered by it as much. So s- there are benefits inside relationships, even though, and I know I'm on this thing about side relationships now, but even though in this day and age, it's like the lines between the main person in the relationship and the side person in the relationship, those things are becoming like way more and more blurred as time passes in this day and age that we're in. It's like it reminds me like of an episode of the show Mad Men and its main character Don Draper. And for people that don't know and haven't watched Mad Men, first of all, I feel bad for you because that show is great. It is one of my favorite shows of all time. It came on AMC, and basically it was about these guys in the ad agency business, which is another reason it appealed to me because I was big into advertising back then. And also it dovetailed with journalism, which is another thing that I've always been into. But the show was set in the 1950s, then it went to the 1960s, and I think when it ended, they were in the 1970s. Like I said, Don Draper was the main character, and he had a wife on the show, but he also had a side piece on the show. And one day he was with a side piece and she's in the bed, and he'd had a hard day at work. There was a lot of stuff going on in his personal life too and stuff like that. And he was just going on and on and on to her and stuff like that. And she was just looking like annoyed. But he just kept going on complaining. And finally she stopped him. And I'm paraphrasing what she said, but she was like, yo, that's stuff for your wife. That's the one that you need to complain to. That's not what I do. It's like, I'm not here for that. So again, that speaks to like those obligations that you have in a relationship. In this case, to listen to this dude riff and moan about whatever it was that he was going through, that as a side piece, you don't have to deal with because you can just sleep with him and go on your way, or sleep with her and go on your way. And, you know, so it just speaks to like back in that time that the show was set, and even more recently, well, not recently, but even since the 70s, even going into the 80s, you know, you had clear defined roles, and there wasn't that blurring of the lines. There was clear separation between the main relationship and the side relationship, and the two didn't mix. Now, of course, you didn't tell the main person about the side person, but you didn't tell the side person about the main person. The side person might know that the main person exists. Hopefully they do, because that would just make it even worse. But even knowing that they exist doesn't necessarily mean that they have to know anything about them. Preferably, they wouldn't know anything about them. It's like, and you didn't tell the main person about the side piece, obviously, because I mean, shoot, obviously, if the main person find out about the side person, that would lead to a bunch of drama, and it might eventually lead to the main person leaving you. And even though you wanted something on the side, that didn't necessarily mean that you wanted to leave the main person. Most likely you didn't. You just wanted to get something to fill that 20% void that was missing from the main relationship. But again, not condoning any of that. It is what it is. Just having an open conversation with myself. So, but you didn't talk to the side person either about the main person, even though, like I said, the side person was aware of the main person. You didn't talk too much about the main person to the side person because, one, if you talk too glowingly about the main person, the side person would get jealous. That was a possibility. It's like, ah, shoot, she's getting all of this. You're doing all of this for her, but you're not doing this for me. That could obviously lead to some drama. And then if you complained about the main person too much, then the side person would get hopeful. It's like the side person might think, oh, shoot, he's having all of these problems. I don't present those problems for him. That means that he can eventually leave her and comes and be with me. So, and then they might start acting crazy, and that leads to a whole bunch of drama, which nobody wants. So, yeah, that's the main reason why you kept them separate. But it's like these days, things are crazy because it's like way too many times the main people are giving the side people like this false hope. And like I said, oftentimes it involves complaining about the main relationship to the sides. And like I said, this leads to them thinking that they have a chance of becoming the main person. Because just on a side note, to that side note, one thing that I've noticed in relationships in general and people that I know in relationships is that most people, they spend more time complaining about their relationships than they do bigging up their relationships or commending their relationships. Obviously, there are exceptions, but a lot of people, when I talk to, they're talking about, oh, this person did this and this person did that. And I'm sick of this person doing this and doing that. How was your week? How's old girl doing? Or how's old boy doing? Ah, shoot, they tripping. We got into an argument last week and all of this and all of that. And they don't spend as much time, they don't spend an equal amount of time talking about all of the good things that are going on with their relationships. It's gotten better as I've gotten older. More mature relationships are getting doing better at that, but still, in a lot of cases, they don't miss an opportunity to like talk about the argument they just got in or something like that. Like, yeah, and I guess that can be for a couple of reasons. It's like one, it's like I can see them not wanting to like feel like they're rubbing their good relationship. And like if you're single or if you're in a bad relationship and they know it's a bad relationship, you don't want to be coming back every day like, oh, yeah, we did this. And yeah, this person's great. And yeah, this person. And so I can understand how that would be one reason why you wouldn't spend as much time talking about the positives in your relationship, because it can come across as bragging, especially to someone who's not in a relationship or someone that you know is in a bad relationship. So I get that. So that's one reason. Or, people just are negative and they only want to talk about the negative because they want you to get on their side. And even though it has nothing to do with you, they want to be like, yeah, girl, you're right. Or yeah, boy, you're right. And all of that stuff. And she just crazy or he's wrong and all of that stuff. So it can be a variety of reasons that people don't talk enough about the positives in their relationships. But I just found that interesting. But anyway, that was me talking about, how the main people can blur the lines. And with all of that said, the side pieces talking about how the mains blur the lines and all of that stuff. It's not to let the side pieces off the hook either. They don't really know their places either. They take way too many liberties instead of just staying in their lane and chilling. But again, I'm not condoning any of that. I know I talked about it as though I am condoning that, but no, that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to condone any of that stuff. Do what you do, and that's yeah, do what you do. I'm just pointing out how differently things are these days as opposed to how they were back in those days, and like 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 back in the day you wouldn't even notice somebody had a side piece until like that person died, and then the side piece would show up at the funeral or something, and then there'd be whole all this drama and stuff like that. And that's because everybody knew their place. Shoot, I've heard stories about people having whole separate families in whole different places. I've even heard of people having separate families in the same city, in the same town, and they preserved that mess for life. And people only found out after they died, and then things got messy as to who gets what, how do you divide this up? Oh shoot, he was cheating. Oh shoot, she was cheating, or whatever it was. So, and again, that speaks to how people knew their place. And again, I'm not condoning it, but everybody out there listening, you have to admit that it's pretty impressive to manage that. And to be honest about it, while I'm thinking about it, that's probably like the main contributor to like their death. The stress of trying to manage like two families. Man, that is crazy. That is crazy. That's a lot. And as someone who hasn't been married, man, just dating multiple people at the same time can be a whole lot for me. Being married to somebody and telling somebody that you're going to be married and having kids with two separate people, keeping them separate and having understandings with both of them, like, okay, I I have a job that requires me to travel a lot. So I'm gonna be gone for like 3 days of the week, and then I'm gonna come back and be with you. Man, that's a lot. And then it's like, how do you even manage like the phone calls? It's like, even though you might say that you're going for work or you're going for business or whatever, I would imagine that shoot, that person would still want to talk to you. You have to talk to them every night. I would think that you would talk to your spouse every night if you're not with them every night. But I don't know. I don't know. And I think that's obvious that I don't know. I just find it fascinating. And again, yeah, I just find it fascinating. But back to these divorces. Boy, I really took a left turn there, but that's what it made me think of, and that's was interesting to me. But Blair missed like 25 years of the evolution of dating relationships, and actually it was 27 years. So, shoot, can't leave out that extra 2 years. And I'm I must say that someone who's been dating consistently throughout my whole adult life. I mean, obviously, there have been relationships that I've been in that have kind of taken some time away, but not like 20 years. But I can say that relationships have evolved from when I started dating, like in the late 80s to like now. Relationships have evolved. And much they've evolved much like the three-way relationships with the main and the spouse and the side piece relationships evolved in the ways that I was talking about earlier when I took that crazy left turn. But yeah, relationships conventional relationships, let's say, have evolved. um and it's interesting, something that someone who's been married and out of the game for 20 years I have to realize. And one of the main things that I'm finding in this day and age is that men and women are demanding a lot more from each other. And like women have always had demands and expectations of what a man should do and what a man should be, what makes a man, and all of that stuff. But men didn't have as many. At least they didn't articulate those demands and expectations that they had, and that is changing. And it's interesting because men have, see, I don't want to say that they have more expectations. Like I said before, like just now, I just think that they were more, for lack of a better word, shy about telling you what they were, or they just had an assumption that the woman they were with would eventually meet them halfway, or they were raised that a man should do all of this stuff for a woman, and then feeling beaten down and all of this and stress and stuff like that, they started to get more vocal about it. And I know that that's an adjustment for women, and it's interesting talking to women about those things and kind of getting their gauge on how they feel about it. Some women are just like, yeah, understood, but part of it is the men should have been making more demands from the beginning, which is true. And then part of it also, I talk to women who are just resistant to it. They're just like, yo, that's what makes a man a man. So so that's one way that things have changed, talking about the evolution of dating. And another thing that I've noticed in dating and how things have evolved is that people are, and I don't know if this is an age thing, a generational thing, the fact that I'm 50 now and I'm dating people who are older, like in their 40s, but people are a lot more bitter and distrusting now than I think they were back in the day, uh, 27 years ago. It seems like everyone, male and female, has this like you first mentality where it's like you show your cards first and then I'll show you yours. Show me your cards. Once I see that I like your cards, then I'll show you mine. It's the equivalent of people talking about they have walls up or that they're guarded and all of that stuff that people often say. Oftentimes it's women that say that, but still more and more men are saying that too, are talking about being guarded and having walls up. And then that leads to the question, okay, if I'm guarded and you're guarded, okay, what do we do? I mean, how can we establish something if we're both guarded? We both can't be walking on eggshells, like circling around each other and all of that stuff. It's it's interesting to me. So, but with all of that said, so unless Blair, in this case, Blair Underwood, unless he has something, or someone, something meaning someone, already lined up to jump into after the divorce, he's going to find that jumping back into the dating pool, it's a crazy experience. And I don't think it's a bad thing. Like, I think the one thing that has been unspoken is for the longest time is the stress, the unconscious anxiety that's placed on men to be protectors, providers, do these things, and all of this, and hopefully the woman will come around and stuff like that. So I don't think it's bad that men be more vocal. I think that's what men should have done for the longest time. The problem though is the bitterness though, and the problem is that you first attitude and all of that stuff. For a man to express that he doesn't want to live up to those unrealistic expectations that a woman might have of him, I think that's fair, but I think you can do that in a way that doesn't come across as just anger or bitterness or distrust and things like that. You put it out there, and if she understands and accepts what demands you have, the same way that you can accept or reject the demands that she has, you put it out there, and if she's not with it, you move on. But the whole thing about I don't trust you, so I don't want to like give of myself or show vulnerability and all of that stuff. That's old. Somebody has to take the leap, and men need to take the leap, and women need to take the leap as well, because women are known to be products of their bad experiences and carrying those into other relationships. And I can hear women, and I have heard women say, well, men do that too. But still, I think, well, I'll just say I feel safe in saying that women do it more than men. Men can do it too, but that's not to say that the numbers are equivalent. So, and I can hear women out there saying, well, what men are you dating? None. Anyway, that's a debate that we're not going to have. But with all of that said, it's like when I talk about Blair and Bill Gates and Bezos and all of these cats, these kinds of divorces are like happening to like the rich and famous, rich and or famous. Like I say, I don't know. I don't want to count Blair's money, but it's also happening to non-rich and famous people too. Like I've dated, I've dated women that have been married for 20 years. And let me just say one more thing, going back for a second about Blair and Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and all of that stuff, before I get into like women that I've dated who aren't rich and famous. I will say that being rich and or famous can help ease a lot of that evolution learning curve that you have to deal with, because if you're rich and or famous, and definitely if you're both, yeah, you'll find uh, that there are women out there who are more agreeable to going back to the old school ways that you remembered back in the day, because you have basically money to offer them, or the perception of money. So Blair or any of these other people, they won't find it all that as hard to adjust to how times have changed with regard to dating. And again, that's if they don't already have something in the pipeline lined up. But going back to women, my experiences in dating, I've dated women who have been married and for 20 years and then had gotten divorced. And from my experiences in dating them, while they won't usually admit that their marriages had affected their dating perspectives, it became clear after a while that their marriages had affected their dating perspectives, and not in a positive way. It's like one woman that I dated, she actually used to compare me to her husband. Like when we would like disagree on something or get into an argument or something like that, she would actually say, yeah, my husband used to do that. You act just like my husband. It's like, wow, that was weird. And I admit that's the extreme example. Yeah, yeah, that was extreme. Um, Other women that I dated, they didn't do that, but they did have a level of distrust that wasn't there because of anything that I done. It was distrust that as you got deeper and deeper, it was obviously tied to what had happened to them in that marriage. And while I had had that happen in just dating relationships with women that had had bad experiences in dating, when you're talking about marriage, it just seemed like it was more intense. It just seemed like they were even more guarded, or they had walls up that were even higher that you would have to scale if you were willing to take that chance, just because of all of the years of dealing with things that they dealt with that they didn't want to deal with. And then the third type of woman that I've dated who had been married for a long time w- were women who were super eager to get back into relationships as fast as possible because they couldn't handle the evolution, how things had changed from back in the day, and how guys were more demanding, how guys were more aggressive and not in a good way, how just angry a lot of guys were. So when they meet someone who comes across as sane, can actually hold a conversation, who actually talks as though he has some sense, all of a sudden they're like pressing you like, yo, I know what I want. I know what I want. I know what I want. Let's just do this. And it's just like, whoa, no, there's a process to this. It's like the whole idea of love at first sight in your 40s and 50s. I don't know how realistic that is when you're looking for something long term as opposed to how it was in your 20s and 30s. So those are the three experiences that I've had when dating women who were married for that long. Now, I've also dated women who were married for like a minute and a half and they didn't really have those hangups. It's almost like they saw their marriages as relationships and they just can kind of easily forget them, which is weird to me also, considering that uh, I just think of a marriage as deeper. You're taking vows and all that, but that's not me trying to be judgy or anything like that. It is what it is. But reg- regarding these long-term marriages that lead to divorce, I just always thought that, you get married and there's a rocky adjustment period of having somebody in your space all the time, that person being your spouse, and you having different obligations to your spouse as your spouse. But and then you get that 7-year itch that people always talk about and stuff like that. And then after a while, definitely before you get to 20 years, things would kind of smooth out and you would just know the person would know you, and that's what it would be. I kind of always saw it as like a plane. When you get in, the takeoff can be bumpy and all of that stuff. But then after a while, you get to your cruising altitude, the seatbelt light goes off and you can take off your seatbelt and you can chill and relax, and I just thought that cruising altitude, once you got to the 20 plus year mark, you would kind of sustain that. But obviously not. Apparently, yeah, that isn't the case. But with that said, it just seems like to me that it wouldn't take 20 years for someone to realize that this marriage isn't for the long haul. It's like, even if you saw problems in the marriage and you were willing to deal with it, it just seems like you would come to a conclusion before 2 decades that things weren't going to change for the better, that you weren't going to come to a workable solution, that this marriage wasn't sustainable. It seems like you come to that conclusion before 20 years, regardless of how hard you tried or whatever it is. And maybe there's that component of, well, we're just together for the kids' sake or something like that. But even that, wow, that's a lot of time spent just being unhappy with somebody and missing out on who could truly be a soulmate. But hey, I guess it's better to realize that your stuff isn't workable and get a divorce later as opposed to never getting a divorce. So I guess like Dr. Phil used to say, and I always quote this to people and they always laugh, but Dr. Phil said it and I believe it. The only thing that's worse than being married, than a only thing worse than being in a bad marriage for 20 years is being in a bad marriage for 20 years in one day. So yeah, it just speaks to the whole better late than never thing. But with that said, when it all comes down to it, what really do I know? I'm not even married. So I'm just looking at it from the outside. And when talking about these relationships that's ending the way that they are, I'm kind of glad to be looking at it from the outside. I don't want to be with somebody for 20 years and then get divorced, feeling like I wasted the prime years of my life with somebody that I wasn't meant to be with. Whew. Oh, Mary. Anyway, thanks for listening. That's all I got for today. If that wasn't enough, I tell you, if that wasn't enough to bring you down, hey, come back Thursday or Friday when the next episode goes up, probably Friday, and I'll give you more. I'm Michael. Thanks for coming by again. Say goodbye, Reggie. Well, he didn't say anything, so I guess I'll say goodbye for both of us. Bye. Thanks. Oh yeah, email me podcast at dating. No, email me a podcast at datingwhileadulting.com or email me directly at michael at datingwhileadulting.com. Go to datingwhileadulting.com to see the latest content and all of that good stuff. And until probably Friday, yeah, have a good week, people, or whenever you listening to this, because you might not even listen to this episode until weeks down the road. I'm finding that to be the case in a lot of cases. So whenever you listen to it, have a great week, regardless of what week that is. Come back in a few days and listen to the next episode, or the next episode might be up already. We do two a week. Yeah. Anyway, that's enough of that. Goodbye. Go about your day.